You inherited the place from your father with $1,800 in the register and a hand-painted sign that said, "Fair prices, fair deals." He believed that. He'd hold a wedding ring under the loupe and tell a woman what it was actually worth, then pay her 90% of it, and she'd cry, and he'd give her a tissue from the box he kept under the counter specifically for that. That box is still there. You still refill it. And somewhere between the second year and the fifth, you stopped noticing that you'd started keeping it for a completely different reason. Not to comfort people, but to keep them at the counter 30 seconds longer while they talked themselves into a number you'd already decided on. You're going to make one particular loan in about 4 years, on a Tuesday, to a man who won't look you in the eye. You won't think twice about it. It will be the smallest ticket you write that whole week. And it will be the reason 2 federal agents eventually sit in your father's chair and ask you to explain your entire life. But that's later. Right now, you're just trying to make rent. Here's what nobody tells you about the pawn business. It isn't a store. It's a bank for people banks won't touch, and it's a museum of the worst week of everyone's life. The guy pawning his drill set isn't a hobbyist. He's a contractor whose truck needs a transmission, and without the truck, there's no work to redeem in 30 days. The woman with the gold chain isn't liquidating an asset. She's $40 short on a light bill, and there's a kid in the car. You learn to read the parking lot before they ever come through the door. The engine still running means they're desperate and fast. Engine off, sitting there for a minute, means they're negotiating with themselves about whether to come in at all. That's the one who'll take whatever you offer. The legitimate math is brutal, and it's important you understand this because it's where the temptation is born. Your loan is 30 days at whatever interest your state lets you charge. Call it 20% monthly plus storage plus a ticket fee. Sounds predatory until you run the numbers on default. Roughly 70 to 80% of your tickets get redeemed. The other 20 turns into inventory you now have to store, photograph, list, and eventually sell to somebody who has infinite patience and a smartphone that tells them exactly what everything is worth. Your margin on legitimate resale is thinner than anyone thinks. Meanwhile, you're carrying insurance on a building full of other people's stuff. You're paying a guy to sit behind bulletproof glass, and every 3rd month somebody drives a stolen car through your front window at 4 a.m. for a case of chains worth maybe $6 grand. And you have compliance. God, you have compliance. Every state has some version of it, and it exists because pawn shops are where stolen property goes to become money. So you take a thumbprint, you photocopy the ID. You hold the item in a locked cage for a mandatory hold period of 10 days, 15, 30, depending on where you are, before you can sell it or melt it. You upload every single transaction to a police database, leads online, rapid, whatever your jurisdiction uses, serial numbers, descriptions, the seller's name and address. A detective in a room somewhere can search Milwaukee M18 impacts driver and see that you took one in on the 4th at 2:15 in the afternoon from a man whose thumbprint is on file. You do all of that correctly for 6 years. You're good at it. You're the shop the detectives actually like, because when they call, you pick up and you've got the item and you've got a photo of the guy holding it. The first compromise doesn't feel like a compromise. It feels like customer service. A regular comes in, to call him Dale, a roofer, in and out for years. Always redeems, never a problem. He's got a nail gun and a compressor, and he's short. Not short on the loan, short on ID. Lost his wallet. He's got the license photo on his phone. And you know his face, you know his truck. You've had his thumbprint on 100 tickets. So you write the ticket against his old file. You copy his information forward from a previous transaction, and you take a new thumbprint and send it all up to the database exactly like always. Nothing about that is legal. The ID has to be physically presented. But nothing about it is wrong either. Not in the way you understand wrong. Dale's not a thief. Dale's a guy who lost his wallet. And here's the thing about the first one. You get a story out of it. Not a lie exactly, a frame. You tell yourself you're not a compliance clerk. You're a lender to people the system already threw away. And if you turn away every guy with a missing driver's license, all you've done is sent him to the guy across town who won't take a thumbprint at all. You're the safer option. You're doing harm reduction. That frame is going to do a lot of work over the next few years. Every single time it gets used, it stretches a little wider. 6 months in, it stops being about ID. A guy comes in with 3 chainsaws. 3. Same model, all still, all with the serial plates present and legible, all showing exactly the amount of wear you'd expect from equipment that belongs to a landscaping crew. He says he's liquidating after a partner buyout. He has an ID, he'll give a thumbprint, he'll sign anything. He wants $400 for equipment worth $2,200 retail. You know. You don't know anything about that transaction being legally defective, but you know. And the thing you do isn't to refuse. The thing you do is write it up as 1 ticket for 1 chainsaw at $400 and put the other 2 in the back, unticketed, off book, to be sold for cash later. Because the pattern is what triggers the detective search. 1 chainsaw is a guy who needed money. 3 chainsaws on 1 ticket is a flag in a database. You didn't break a law by buying them. You broke the law by hiding 2 of them. And the money is real. That's the part people underestimate. 2 still saws move for $1,100–$1,200 cash to a guy who runs crews and doesn't ask questions, on a Saturday, in your parking lot, in about 4 minutes. You made more on that handshake than you made on your entire legitimate loan book that week. It went into a coffee can, then a safe, then a second account under the shop's name that never sees a deposit slip. The escalation from there is not dramatic, it's administrative. That's what nobody understands about how this actually happens. There's no moment where you decide to become a criminal. There's a moment where you decide to become efficient. Year 2 of the drift, you start shorting the holds period. The cage is supposed to keep an item untouched for the mandatory window, so a victim has time to file a report and a detective has time to run a serial. You start pulling gold out of the cage on day 3 and running it to a refiner, because gold is the perfect product for this. It has no serial number, it doesn't photograph distinctively, and once it's melted, it is chemically identical to every other piece of gold on Earth. A stolen chain isn't a stolen chain after the crucible, it's a bar. You start telling yourself the hold period is a formality that punishes cash flow, and you're not even entirely wrong. And being not entirely wrong is the most dangerous thing you can be in this business. Year 3, you start managing the database instead of feeding it. You never file a false report. You're not stupid. That's a straight felony with your signature on it. What you do is get creative with descriptions. A specific make and model becomes an assorted power tool. A distinctive engraved bracelet becomes a yellow metal necklace, 14 karat. You're technically reporting. You're just reporting in a way that makes the search return nothing. A detective typing in a serial number gets 0 hits, not because you lied, but because you described a thing so generically that it has become invisible in a database of 2 million entries. Year 4, you have a supplier, not a customer, a supplier. He comes in Tuesdays and Thursdays with a duffel bag, and the arrangement is that you pay him 30 cents on the dollar in cash, and you never ask and he never volunteers. He's not the guy stealing it. He's the guy who buys it from the guy stealing it, a middle layer that exists specifically so that neither end of the chain can testify to the other. You've built a wholesale operation with a retail front store in front of it, and the front store is doing well enough now that you've got a second location, a truck with your name on it, a house with a gate. And you are afraid all the time. That's the part that doesn't show up in the fantasy. The paranoia scales faster than the income. You start recognizing unmarked cars. You start noticing when a customer's questions are a little too procedural, when someone asks about the hold period in a way that sounds less like curiosity and more like an inventory of your process. You install cameras, and then you realize the cameras are evidence, so you set them to a 7-day loop, and then you realize a 7-day loop on a business with a 30-day hold is itself suspicious. You can't sleep on Sunday nights. You start drinking on Tuesdays and Thursdays before he comes, then during, then just generally. Your employee, the guy behind the glass, has been with you since your father, asks you one afternoon why the back room is locked now. That's all. One question, no accusation. You fire him 3 weeks later over a manufactured issue with his register drawer, and you give him severance he didn't earn because you can't look at him, and you tell yourself it was a business decision. He'd been at your father's funeral. He carried the casket. The close call comes on a Thursday. A detective walks in, not on a call, not with a warrant, just a guy with a folder, and asks about a violin. A violin, not gold, not tools, 100-year-old instrument taken in a house burglary, and it's not on your books because it came in the duffel, and it's not in your cage because you already sold it, and it is unfortunately extremely identifiable, and it has been posted to a specialty forum by the collector who bought it from you, with photographs, with the shop's name in the listing. You have about 9 seconds to choose a story, and the story you choose is the truest available lie. You don't remember. Volume business. Thousands of items. You'll check the records. And you check the records in front of him, and the records are clean, because you cleaned them. And he looks at you a beat too long and says he'll be in touch. He is not in touch. Not for 11 months. That's how it works. They don't come back when they've got nothing. They come back when they've got everything. And here's where the story turns, and it isn't the way you think. Nothing collapses, not dramatically. There's no raid, no news van, no cinematic perp walk. What happens is that your supplier gets picked up on something unrelated, a traffic stop, a warrant, something small and stupid. And he sits in an interview room and does the arithmetic that every person in that room eventually does, which is that loyalty is a luxury good and he can't afford it. And he gives them Tuesdays. He gives them a duffel bag. He gives them to you. And when they come, they don't come for the violin. They come with a spreadsheet. Because that's what you never understood about the database. You thought you were hiding in it. You weren't. You were building it. Every generic description, every assorted power tool, every yellow metal necklace, those weren't erasures. Those were entries. And when a forensic accountant lines up your reported inventory against your bank deposits, against your refiner's receipts, against 11 years of thumbprints, the gap isn't a mystery. The gap is the case. They can't prove what any individual item was. They don't have to. They only have to prove that $800,000 came into your life from somewhere your books can't explain. That's the smallest ticket of that week. 4 years back, on that Tuesday with the man who wouldn't look at you, a $200 loan on a wedding set taking off a woman's nightstand while she slept in the next room. It's one line item. It's nothing. But it's the one where your generic description was just specific enough to match a police report. And it's the anchor that lets them argue pattern, and pattern is what turns a business dispute into a conspiracy charge. You don't go to prison for stealing. You go for structuring, for money laundering, for receiving. 38 months. The shop is forfeited. Your father's sign, the hand-painted one, fair prices, fair deals, goes into an evidence box and then into a landfill. And you find out about it from a paralegal who mentions it in passing. Here's the thing worth taking away from this, and it's not crime doesn't pay, because sometimes it does, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. It's that corruption almost never arrives as a choice between right and wrong. It arrives as a choice between right and reasonable. Dale lost his wallet. That's reasonable. The hold period hurts cash flow. That's reasonable. A generic description is technically a description. That's reasonable. Every single step was defensible in isolation, and that's precisely the mechanism, because a man who has to defend one small thing will build a frame to defend it with. And that frame doesn't disappear afterward. It stays. It gets reused. It gets load-bearing.
And by the time you're paying a stranger 30 cents on the dollar for a duffel bag, you're not a different person than you were the day you helped Dale. You're the same person standing on 11 years of scaffolding you built one reasonable plank at a time. The tell is never the money. The tell is the moment you start needing a story. Your father never needed one. That's the whole difference between you. If you want to see how this same scaffolding gets built somewhere with much better suits, go watch the one on the pharmaceutical rep. That one's worse, and he never sees a courtroom at all.